A millionaire asked a waitress for financial advice as a joke, then realized she knew more than he did. The thing about Mary's Diner was that it didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. Lisa Bennett had been working here for 10 years, since she was 16 and her mother needed help. Mary Bennett ran the diner with the kind of grace that only came from having survived storms and chosen peace over bitterness. She'd walked away from Joe Peterson 20 years ago, back when leaving a powerful man meant sacrificing financial security and social status. Back when she'd finally realized that her daughter's well-being was worth more than his approval. Joe Peterson had never tried to get her back. He'd sent money, enough to cover school fees and college tuition, but never affection. His silence had been louder than his absence. It was the kind of rejection that shaped a person, that made them hungry to prove something to a man who would never truly see them. Lisa had grown up determined to prove her father wrong, prove that a daughter was not a consolation prize, that she could build or lead any empire if given the chance. But for now, she was here, working beside her mother, building something together. She was refilling coffee when they walked in. 4 men in expensive suits, early 30s, the kind of people who made rooms rearrange themselves without asking. They moved with the confidence of men accustomed to being listened to having their words treated as gospel. Lisa almost walked past their table without stopping. "Peterson Hotels is hemorrhaging money," one of them was saying, spreading financial reports across the table as they all sat. His voice carried the weight of authority. "The marketing department is bleeding resources. We need to cut their budget by at least 30%. Lisa halted in her tracks. She knew that name, Peterson Hotels, her father's legacy, the empire he'd built with his bare hands, driven by an obsession with expansion and acquisition and the relentless pursuit of something he could never quite name. It had been failing for months now. She'd read every article, every quarterly report, every analyst's grim prediction. "That's reactive, not strategic," another voice cut in, younger, sharper, more thoughtful. "The problem isn't that they're spending too much. The problem is where they're spending it. They're targeting the wrong demographics with the wrong message." "You're both thinking about this backwards," a third man said, and there was something almost patronizing in his tone. Lisa turned. Before she could think better of it, before her mother could give her that "what are you doing?" look that meant nothing good came from interrupting rich people, she spoke. "You're both wrong, actually." 4 pairs of eyes looked up. The man closest to her had dark eyes, a gorgeous face, and an expensive watch. He looked mildly amused, like she was a piece of entertainment that had just walked into his evening. A distraction from the serious business of money and strategy. "Excuse me?" he said. "Peterson Hotels is spending inefficiently on channels that are becoming obsolete," Lisa continued, already committed now. There was no going back. "But cutting the budget is the wrong solution. You need to restructure their entire approach. The hotel industry is shifting. More millennial travelers, more experience-focused marketing, less traditional media. Your competitors are already 3 years ahead on this." She paused, aware that all 4 men were now staring at her with varying degrees of skepticism. The one in black shirt was studying her like she was an interesting equation. "What you actually need to do is completely reimagine the brand identity," Lisa finished. "Make it personal again. Make it about more than a room with a bed. Make guests feel known, valued, seen." Silence stretched across the booth like a held breath. The man in black shirt, the one she'd recognized from a business journal she'd read 3 times, leaned back in the booth. Alan Reed, the Millionaire consultant, renowned for reviving dying companies. He was smiling, but it was the smile of someone who found this mildly entertaining, condescending even. "That's quite an analysis from a waitress," he said. his tone pitched with obvious mockery. "Tell me, what would you do if you were actually running a major hotel chain? Give us your expert financial advice." His colleagues exchanged glances. One of them bit back a smile. They were waiting for the punchline, for her to embarrass herself. Alan wasn't being serious. This was a test, or worse, a joke at her expense. He was going to humiliate her by asking her to elaborate, then mock her answer in front of his team. Lisa recognized the setup. She'd seen it before with other customers who liked to toy with service workers, who got off on the power dynamic of their money versus someone else's dependence on their tips. But something in her refused to back down. Something that had been building for 26 years refused to be dismissed by a man, no matter how expensive his suit. "Give me a second," she said calmly. She set down her coffee pot and pulled out her notepad. "You want financial advice? Real advice?" "Please," Alan said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Enlighten us." She didn't hesitate. "Personalization at scale," Lisa said, her voice steady and precise. "Redesign your booking algorithm to offer customized experiences based on guest data. Invest in staff training, real training, not just service protocols. Make your employees feel valued, and they'll make your guests feel valued. Upgrade the physical spaces. Most luxury hotels are architecturally distinctive, but dressed in corporate blandness. Strip that away. Make each location memorable." She looked directly at Alan, her eyes steady. "The marketing efficiency will follow once you have a product worth promoting. Right now, you're trying to sell something generic. Make it personal. Make it matter. Then the financial recovery becomes inevitable, not aspirational." She paused, then added, "That's what I'd do. And it would work." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't mocking silence. It was the silence of people who'd expected a joke and gotten something sharp and real instead. Alan's expression had shifted. The amusement was gone, replaced by something more focused, more calculating. He was studying her face like he was trying to solve an equation, and she was the variable that didn't fit his previous understanding. "What's your name?" he asked, and this time his voice was serious. "Lisa," she said. "Lisa Bennett." "How long have you been in consulting, Miss Bennett?" "I haven't," she replied calmly. "I'm a waitress, but I read, I pay attention, and I'm not afraid to say when something's wrong. Education? Business degree from state, finance minor, self-education in hotel operations and market analysis." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. His entire demeanor changed. This wasn't mockery anymore. This was a man who just realized he'd misjudged someone in a fundamental way. "I'd like to hire you," he said simply. "I have a team working on a recovery project for a struggling hotel group. $45,000 a year to start, before performance bonuses. If you're as smart as you seem, and I'm starting to think you might be smarter, you could move up quickly." She should have hesitated, should have asked questions, should have thought about the implications of working for a man hired to save her father's company. Instead, she grabbed her notepad, scribbled her number, and slid it across the table. "Call me," she said simply. She turned and walked back to the kitchen before he could change his mind, before her own mind caught up with what she'd just done. Her mother was waiting, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised in that way that meant she already knew exactly what had happened. Mary had a gift for reading situations. It was probably where Lisa had gotten it from. "Don't," Lisa said preemptively. "I didn't say anything." "You're about to." Mary set down the spatula she'd been holding. "What did you just do?" "I got offered a job," Lisa said. She was still shaking, adrenaline making her fingers tingle. "At Dad's company." Mary's expression shifted. Pride, concern, something deeper that Lisa couldn't quite name. A mother's worry, perhaps. A woman who'd spent decades protecting her daughter from the man she'd had to leave. His company? Mary asked quietly. He hired a consultant, Alan Reed, to recover Peterson Hotels. And you're going to work for him. I'm going to work for the consultant, Lisa corrected. Not for him. It's different. Mary was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving through the motions of cleaning without really seeing what she was doing. Then she walked over and tucked a strand of hair behind Lisa's ear. Your father made his choices, Lisa. A long time ago. He chose what he thought mattered more. He chose wrong, Lisa replied. It was a refrain she'd played 1,000 times in her head. And now his company is failing because he couldn't see past his own reflection, because he was too busy looking for a son to notice he had a daughter who could fix this. And you're going to fix it, Mary said, not a question. I'm going to try. Her mother studied her face for a long moment. Then do it for you, not for him. Promise me. Do this because it matters to you, not because you're trying to prove something to a man who doesn't deserve proving to. I promise, Lisa said. She meant it, mostly. A part of her, a part she wasn't ready to examine too closely, wanted to prove something to Joe Peterson, wanted him to look at her and see what he'd been missing all these years. But there was another part of her that was genuinely hungry to do something meaningful, something that would matter beyond her father's acknowledgement or dismissal. The office tower was glass and steel and the kind of indifference that made Lisa's skin crawl. 20 stories of corporate ambition stacked against a blue sky. Alan's receptionist didn't even blink when she walked in the next morning at 9 a.m. sharp, which meant he'd actually called, which meant this was real. He's in his office, the receptionist said, third door on the left. Alan was on the phone when Lisa entered, but he held up a finger, 1 minute, and finished his conversation while Lisa stood there in her good blazer, trying not to sweat through it. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist, expensive, designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract art that looked really expensive. Everything clean lines and sharp angles. You came, he said after hanging up, turning to face her fully. He was dressed more casually today, rolled up sleeves, no jacket, and he looked younger somehow, more human. You called. I did. He studied her for a moment, like he was still trying to solve that equation. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you ever worked in consulting? No. Corporate environment? No. Then why do I feel like I should hire you anyway? Because she could read people like they were balance sheets. Because she'd spent her entire life analyzing her father's failures from a distance, understanding exactly where things had gone wrong, where opportunities had been missed, because she was ambitious in a way that made her dangerous to people who underestimated her. Because I can, Lisa said simply. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to apologize for existing or for having opinions. And because you know it. He smiled at that. A real smile, not the polished one he'd given her in the diner. All right, he said. You're hired. Let's talk compensation and start date. By lunch, she had a job offer and a start date of Monday morning. By week 2, the executives in the conference room had stopped treating her like a novelty and started treating her like a threat. You're proposing we completely rebrand during a financial crisis, the CFO said. He was maybe 35, wearing the kind of skepticism that came from someone who'd never been surprised by anything. That's insane. No, what's insane is expecting different results from the same failed strategy, Lisa replied, pulling up the guest satisfaction data on the screen. The numbers were damning, a downward trajectory that was accelerating. Look at this. Guests aren't leaving because the rooms aren't nice enough. They're leaving because Peterson Hotels doesn't give them any reason to choose you over your competitors. You've become a commodity, interchangeable. She clicked to the next slide, showing competitive analysis. You fix that by remembering what made Peterson hotels matter in the first place. You make guests feel known. You invest in experiences, not just accommodations. You train staff like they're ambassadors, not just employees. And the ROI on that? Someone asked skeptically. Better than the current trajectory of decline, Lisa said flatly, which is bankruptcy if you keep moving at this speed. The room went quiet. She'd said the word no one wanted to say, the word everyone was thinking. By week 4, Alan was staying late to work through strategy with her. They were alone in the office like they've been for weeks now. The city glowing outside the windows, everyone else gone home for the evening. It was nearly 11 p.m. Lisa had her feet tucked under her on the chair, which was probably not professional, but Alan hadn't seemed to care. They'd been debating guest experience metrics for the past 3 hours, and somewhere around hour 2, they'd stopped pretending this was strictly business. "You're thinking about this wrong," she told him, gesturing at the spreadsheet on his screen. "You're trying to cut costs, but Peterson Hotels doesn't need cuts. They need rediscovery." Alan leaned back in his chair. He was young, early 30s at most, with the kind of face that made people stop mid-sentence. But it was his mind that held her attention. The way he thought, the way he listened, the way he made her feel like her opinions actually mattered, like she wasn't just a consultant but a partner in this work. "Explain," he said. "When was the last time a hotel made you feel like they actually knew you?" Lisa asked. "Like you mattered?" That's what Peterson Hotels used to be. That's what they need to be again. But you can't fake that with spreadsheets and corporate policies. How do you fix it then? "You make it real," Lisa said. "Every interaction, every moment. You hire people who actually care. You train them properly. You empower them to make decisions. You measure success differently, not by how many rooms you fill, but by how many guests come back." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're going to do something extraordinary, Lisa," he said finally. She didn't pull away when he reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her jaw for just a moment, long enough that her pulse quickened, long enough that she couldn't pretend it was accidental. "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Of what?" "That I won't be good enough. That this is temporary. That I'll wake up and realize I dreamed it." Alan's thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You're good enough. You're more than good enough. You're exceptional." He kissed her before she could respond, his hand moving to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. It was gentle at first, questioning, like he was asking for permission, then deeper, more certain. She tasted coffee and ambition and something that felt like the beginning of everything. When he pulled away, his eyes were still closed for a moment. "Tell me I'm not making a huge mistake," he said. Lisa should have. She should have told him everything right then. Should have explained about her father, about Peterson Hotels, about the elaborate deception she was perpetuating. But instead, she kissed him again because she was a coward and because she wanted to believe that this was real, untainted by lies. 3 months in, Peterson Hotels was recovering. The media noticed. Business journals ran pieces about the turnaround. Alan's name was mentioned prominently. So was a mysterious, unnamed consultant whose strategic insights were reshaping the entire brand. Lisa read the articles from her apartment at night, knowing what she'd done, knowing what she wasn't telling him. The guilt sat in her chest like a stone, but it was outweighed by something else. The way he looked at her in meetings, the way he found excuses to touch her, the way he'd started talking about after this project, like there was a future they were building together. They'd been together for 6 weeks when he first said it. They were in his apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that screamed successful bachelor. The kind of place where everything was beautiful and nothing felt lived in until she arrived. He was lying in bed beside her, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, and he said casually, like it wasn't the most terrifying thing she'd ever heard, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Lisa's breath caught. She wanted to say it back, wanted to pretend that her silence wasn't a form of lying, that her omission wasn't a betrayal. "That's terrifying," she said instead. "I know." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "But it's also the only thing that makes sense right now. You're in my head constantly. I think about you when I'm not working. I want to tell you things before I tell anyone else. That's love, right? That's what it feels like." She turned to face him, studying his features in the darkness. He looked peaceful, happy, completely unaware that the woman in his bed was a walking contradiction, brilliant and deceitful, ambitious and cowardly, in love with him while actively betraying him. "Alan, don't," he said, pulling her closer. "Don't overthink it. Just feel it." But she couldn't. She couldn't feel anything except the weight of what she wasn't telling him. That's when Jessica Hart started paying attention in a way that transcended professional jealousy. Jessica had been Alan's associate for years. She was competent, professional, and deeply connected to the hotel's branch managers through a network of carefully constructed favors. She'd watched Alan transform from a focused consultant into a man who was distracted, softer, openly smitten with the younger woman who'd waltzed into the project and stolen his attention. Jealousy is a cancer. It metastasizes silently through thought and action until a person can barely remember who they were before it took root. Jessica had been in love with Alan for years, a quiet, patient kind of love that expected nothing and got exactly that. Then Lisa arrived, and suddenly Alan had attention for something other than work. So Jessica decided to make Lisa look incompetent. She began showing up to meetings Lisa wasn't scheduled for, inserting herself into projects that had nothing to do with her, finding ways to undermine Lisa's credibility without ever saying anything directly damaging. "It's risky," Jessica said in a meeting about the new marketing strategy, her voice pitched with concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're moving too fast. The rebranding timeline is aggressive. The ROI projections are optimistic at best." "The current trajectory is worse," Lisa replied calmly, presenting the quarterly projections. "We're losing market share quarterly. Every month we wait is market share we don't recover. 6 months from now, it'll be too late." "Which we can solve with operational adjustments," Jessica countered, her tone almost sympathetic. "Incremental change is safer, less risk." "That's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound," Lisa said flatly. "You're talking about marginal improvements to a fundamentally broken model." Alan was watching the exchange. He reached under the table and squeezed Lisa's knee, a gesture of support, a reminder that he was on her side. It made her feel simultaneously loved and sick. The tension built over weeks. Jessica made comments about Lisa's lack of experience. She questioned Lisa's recommendations in meetings, always with a smile, always phrased as concern rather than criticism. She pulled aside the branch managers and whispered doubts, creating a low hum of uncertainty that Lisa could feel even when she couldn't hear the words. Lisa tried to ignore it. She kept working. She kept delivering results. And she kept going home to Alan and pretending that everything was fine, that she wasn't a walking lie, that her love for him was worth the betrayal of his trust. While Alan visited one of the hotel branches alongside Lisa and the rest of his team members, Lisa left them to get a tour of the building. She stopped as she noticed a commotion at the reception area. A woman looking sharp-edged and wealthy, the kind of woman who believed her bank account gave her authority over human dignity. She had arrived at the front desk of the hotel, her voice cutting through the lobby like a knife. A bellhop had been helping another guest unload luggage when one wheel, still wet from the rain outside, rolled too close and left a faint streak of mud on her designer heels. Her eyes darkened as if he'd committed a crime. "Those stilettos cost more than your entire salary," she sneered. "Now bend down and clean the dust off with your tongue." Lisa saw Marcus's face. The bellhop, a kid in his early 20s who'd worked at Peterson Hotels for 2 years, who'd taken this job to put himself through community college. She saw the internal calculation happening behind his eyes, the moment where he had to choose between his dignity and his paycheck. She walked over before he could make that choice, before the moment could fully form. "That's not happening," Lisa said simply. The woman's eyes snapped to her. "Excuse me?" "Our staff aren't props," Lisa continued, her voice pleasant but absolutely immobile. "You'll receive excellent service, genuine hospitality, professional attention to your needs. You won't receive acts of humiliation. Those are your options. Please choose one." The woman's face went through a visible transformation, pale with shock, then red with rage, then calculating as she reached for her phone. "I'm a shareholder," she hissed. "I'm investing significant capital in this company. I demand that this woman apologize and do exactly what I asked the boy to do, or I'm pulling my investment and destroying Peterson Hotel's reputation on every platform I have access to." It was the kind of threat that usually worked, the kind of threat that made people fold, made them prioritize wealth over principle. Lisa didn't fold. "I can't do that," she said calmly, "because that's not human." The woman's face purpled. She began typing furiously on her phone, making calls, making it clear that she had the power to destroy what had taken 4 months to build. Jessica materialized moments later, like she'd been waiting in the wings for her cue. The branch manager appeared at her side. Together, they looked like a coalition designed to overwhelm. "Ms. Bennett," Jessica said, her voice dripping false sympathy, "I'm sure we can work this out. Perhaps if you just help our guest, we can move past this unfortunate situation. It's really just a small gesture." "Do you even know what she's asking?" Lisa turned to the woman. "I can clean off your stilettos, but with a piece of cloth, not my tongue." "She's an important guest, Lisa. It's best you do as she said. Just comply." "What part of no did you not understand?" Lisa asked. Jessica's expression hardened. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm going to give you the same answer." Lisa cut her off. "No." Jessica's smile became something sharp and dangerous. "Security," she called, her voice suddenly cold. "Remove her from the premises." The guards started moving. Lisa's heart spiked into something between panic and adrenaline, but her face remained calm. This was it. This was the moment where she either fought or fled. She stood her ground. The lobby had gone silent. Every guest had stopped mid-conversation, watching. The entire room was watching. But the guards hesitated, unsure if they should physically remove someone who was clearly an employee, someone who hadn't committed any violation beyond refusing to be complicit in humiliation. Then the door swung open. Alan entered first, confusion flickering across his face as he assessed the situation. His eyes found Lisa, registered her standing unyielding before the guards. Before he could speak, before his considerable authority could reshape what was unfolding, another man entered, older, taller, carrying himself like the room had been built around him specifically. Joe Peterson. He'd returned from his European tour that morning and come directly to his flagship hotel to inspect the results of Alan's recovery efforts. Instead, he walked directly into his daughter being publicly humiliated in his own lobby. His eyes swept across the scene. The guards, Jessica's triumph, the shareholders' rage, Alan's confusion. Then they landed on Lisa, and everything stopped. Recognition bloomed across his face like lightning. "What?" he said quietly, his voice cutting through the marble lobby like a knife. is happening in my hotel. Jessica's entire body went rigid. Joe's gaze moved from the guards to the guest to Jessica to Alan, then back to Lisa. That, he said slowly, his eyes not wavering from hers, is my daughter. The words fell like stones into still water. Everyone froze. Time seemed to suspend itself, and Alan's entire body went rigid as the pieces clicked into place. The diner, the waitress who knew too much about business, the way she'd appeared in his office already decided, already certain, her deliberate use of her mother's surname instead of her father's, the way she'd never once mentioned her family, she'd known all along, she'd orchestrated all of it. His eyes moved to her face, and she watched understanding morph into hurt, into betrayal, into something that looked like devastation. The aftermath was brutal and swift. The shareholder was quietly refunded and offered an upgrade she didn't deserve. Jessica was escorted out by security. Her employment terminated immediately. The branch manager followed shortly after, but none of that mattered because Alan wouldn't look at her. He called her into his office that evening. His expression was carefully controlled, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "You knew," he said, "not a question." "Yes." "From the beginning?" "No. I don't care when you started with what," Alan said, his voice sharp in a way she'd never heard before. "The point is, you lied. You walked into my office and didn't tell me who you were. You came to my bed and didn't tell me who you were." "Because it didn't matter," Lisa said desperately. "Because I needed to prove I could do this on my own merit, not because of who my father was, not because of connections or privilege." "That wasn't your choice to make unilaterally," Alan said. His jaw was tight. "I pride myself on reading people, on understanding motives, on trust. I feel like an absolute idiot right now. Worse, I feel like a fool who fell for the oldest con in the book, the ambitious young woman who seduces the powerful man to get what she wants. That's not what happened, isn't it?" He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. "I gave you access to my team, my clients, my reputation. I put my career on the line for you, and you used me to get close to your father's company. I love you," Lisa said desperately. "That part, I don't know what part is real anymore," Alan said quietly, and his voice broke slightly. "I think you should take some time. We'll reassess the arrangement when we've both had space to process." She left without another word. Mary found her 3 days later, still in bed, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. She narrated what transpired to Mary. "You already told him the truth," Mary finally said after a deep sigh. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Whether he can handle it is on him, not you." "He thinks I used him." "Did you?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "It started that way. But somewhere between the spreadsheets and staying late and him tucking my hair behind my ear and saying he was falling in love with me, it became real. He became real. And I was too much of a coward to tell him." "Then fix it," Mary said simply. "But not for him. For you. Do it because you're worth being seen for who you actually are, not who he thought you were. And because he deserves the truth. The real truth, not a version of it." When Lisa went back to work, she threw herself into the project like it was personal vengeance, which in some ways it was. She worked through nights without sleeping. She identified problems no one else saw. She built a case so thorough, so detailed, so impossible to deny that it became its own kind of testimony. Every recommendation documented, every analysis proven, every strategic insight backed by data. Alan couldn't ignore it. He tried, staying distant, keeping interactions brief, addressing her only through email or in meetings with other people present. But the work spoke for itself. Her recommendations were implemented. They worked. Her analysis was accurate. Her insights drove measurable improvement. She also left him a letter, 3 pages, handwritten, explaining everything, not as an excuse, but as context. She wrote about her childhood, about the absence, about the determination to prove herself. She wrote about the diner and the moment she decided to apply. She wrote about the exact moment when proving something to her father became irrelevant because she was too busy falling in love. "I lied to you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry. But the feelings weren't a lie. That night in your apartment when you said you were falling in love with me, I already had. Completely. Irrevocably. And it terrified me because I knew the truth would destroy it. So I did the thing I've been doing my whole life. I protected myself by lying. But I can't do that anymore. You deserve better. You deserve the real me, flaws and all, even if the real me isn't enough." She left it on his desk unsigned because putting her name on it felt like too much. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the lobby, Alan discovered the financial irregularities. Jessica and the branch manager had been siphoning money for months, more than $100,000 carefully hidden through accounting shells and vendor markup schemes. Systematic theft, covered up carefully enough to avoid immediate detection. He looked at Lisa's initial report, dated 3 weeks ago. She'd flagged the exact discrepancies immediately. He dismissed it because he'd been too angry to listen. He called her into his office late that evening. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. Lisa recognized the feeling intimately. "I found the discrepancies," he said without preamble. "The ones you reported 3 weeks ago." Lisa just stared at him. "You saw something was wrong and reported it immediately." Alan continued quietly. "I didn't listen because I was too hurt to function like a rational person." He held up the letter. "I also found this." Lisa's heart stopped. "I read it," he said. "About 15 times, maybe more." "Alan, let me finish," he said. His voice was different now, softer, more human. "I was angry and hurt because somewhere in the past 4 months, this stopped being about business for me. It became about you, about us, and discovering that you'd hidden something felt like the deepest kind of betrayal. But I've had 3 weeks to think about it, and I realize now that I was angry at myself more than at you." He stepped closer. "I'm a consultant. It's my entire job to read situations, to see patterns, to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. And I didn't see you. Not really. I saw the brilliant consultant and the beautiful woman, but I didn't see that you were terrified, that you were carrying the weight of something enormous. I should have told you." "Yes," he said. "You should have. And I should have asked better questions. I should have noticed that you never talked about your family, that you always used your mother's name, that there was something complicated happening that you weren't ready to share." He took her hand. His skin was warm, familiar. "The question now is whether you're ready to share it. Whether you trust me enough to let me in, not as your boss or your lover, but as someone who wants to know all of you, the ambitious parts and the scared parts, the brilliant parts and the broken parts." "What if I'm not enough?" Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You are," Alan said simply. He pulled her close, his hand cupping her face. "You're more than enough. You're extraordinary. And I'm tired of pretending that I'm angry at you." He kissed her like he was making a promise, slower this time, deeper, like they had all the time in the world. "I'm sorry," Lisa said against his mouth. "I know. So am I." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Can we start over?" "I don't think I want to," Lisa said. "I think I want to keep going forward, with everything, the good parts and the complicated parts. If you'll have me." "I'll always have you," he said, "even when you're infuriating, especially then." Meanwhile, Joe Peterson sought redemption. His hands shook as he knocked on the door to Mary's diner. Mary was wiping down the counter when she looked up and saw him. Her expression didn't change. That was somehow worse than anger. "We're closing soon," she said, not unkindly. "I know," Joe replied. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. "I came to talk to you, if you'll let me." Mary set down her cloth and studied this man she'd once promised to spend her life with. He looked older now, diminished somehow, like success hadn't filled him the way he'd always believed it would. "Sit," she said finally. For the next hour, Joe Peterson admitted his mistakes. Not excuses, not justifications, just the raw, honest acknowledgement that he'd been wrong, that he'd prioritized his company over his daughter and wife, that he'd abandoned a woman and child because he couldn't see past his own ambition. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly, his hands folded on the counter, "but I'm asking for it anyway." Mary listened to every word, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said finally. "Not for you, for me. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting you to die." She paused. "But Lisa, that's between you and her." Joe found Lisa in the office at Peterson Hotels, reviewing quarterly projections. She looked up when he entered, and her expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Peterson," she said simply. Joe's eyes listened with tears. "I need to apologize," he began, but Lisa held up a hand. "No," she said. "You don't." He blinked. "What?" "You don't need to apologize to me," Lisa continued, her voice steady. "You need to apologize to the person you actually wronged, my mother. You left her. You abandoned her with nothing but child support checks and silence." Joe felt something break open inside his chest. "If she forgives you," Lisa said, "then maybe I can too. But her forgiveness comes first. That's not negotiable. I've already met her. She forgave me," he said without preamble. The relief in his voice was palpable, genuine, transformative. Lisa studied her father's face and saw something she'd never seen before. Genuine humility. Not the performative kind that powerful men sometimes wore like armor. The real thing. "Then I forgive you too," she said quietly. A tear dropped down his cheek. He'd expected to feel triumph or vindication. Instead, he felt only gratitude and the deep, aching knowledge of everything he'd lost and could never get back. "I'm proud of you," he said, "for what you did with Peterson Hotels. You saved it when I couldn't." "I did," Lisa agreed simply. "I want to offer you something," Joe continued. "The CEO position, it's yours. You earned it. You should lead this company." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the financial reports on her desk, at the hotel blueprints pinned to her wall, at the window overlooking the city that had once felt like a prison and now felt like a possibility. "No," she said finally. Joe's face registered shock. "No?" "I don't want to lead your company," Lisa said, and walked to the window, her silhouette framed against the city lights. "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I'm not interested in running Peterson Hotels." "Then what do you want?" Joe asked, genuinely confused. "I want to build my own," Lisa replied. She turned back to face him, and her eyes were blazing with purpose. "I already purchased a property, a beautiful historic building that's been abandoned for 3 years. I'm going to restore it and open the first location of my own hotel brand, the Bennett Reed Collection." Joe laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. "You're going to compete with me?" "Eventually," Lisa said with a small smile, "but not for a while. I need time to build properly." "Lisa," Joe said, his voice taking on the concerned tone of a businessman, "starting from scratch is expensive. You'll need significant capital to—" "I know," Lisa interrupted calmly, "but I've already proven I can raise a dying empire. Building one from nothing can't be harder." "I've already taken care of that," Alan said as he entered, his arms settling around Lisa's waist. "I'm her #1 investor. I believe in her vision completely." Joe's entire body went rigid. How long have you known about this? Joe asked, his voice sharp. Since the beginning, Alan replied without hesitation. Since before she showed me the property. Since before she drew up the first blueprints. Joe's face flushed. You're going to betray me? You're going to leave me and join my competitor? Alan met Joe's gaze directly, unflinching. I couldn't betray you, he said calmly, when I'm about to become your son-in-law. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Joe's expression shifted to shock. Lisa's gaze snapped toward Alan, her eyes widening slightly. Neither of them had expected that. Neither of them had known this was coming. What did you just... Joe started. But Alan was already moving. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and dropped to one knee in front of Lisa. Lisa's breath caught. Tears sprang to her eyes immediately. Lisa Bennett, Alan said, his voice steady and certain. I came into Mary's diner that evening thinking I was hiring a consultant on business strategy. I didn't know I was about to meet the woman who would change everything, who would challenge me and push me and make me a better person, who would love me even when I was being an idiot. He opened the box. The ring caught the light, simple, elegant, devastatingly beautiful. Will you marry me? Alan finished. Yes, Lisa breathed, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Joe stood frozen, watching his daughter accept a ring and a future from a man who just publicly declared his intention to marry into his family. The shock on his face slowly transformed into something like awe. As Alan stood and pulled Lisa close, kissing her deeply while she laughed and cried simultaneously, Joe could only shake his head in amazement. Congratulations, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Both of you. Months later, the Bennett Reed Collection opened its first luxury boutique hotel. The beautifully restored historic building had been transformed from an abandoned relic into a sanctuary of luxury that somehow felt intimate and personal. Every detail had been designed with intention. Every experience had been crafted to make guests feel not just accommodated, but genuinely known and valued. The event drew press coverage and admiration from across the industry. Mary stood proudly at her daughter's side, wearing a simple, elegant dress, her hand linked through Lisa's arm. Joe attended quietly, humbled but deeply proud. He stood at a respectful distance, watching his daughter move through the crowd with grace and authority. On her left hand, an engagement ring caught the light. And Alan stood beside Lisa whenever he could, his hand at the small of her back, looking at her with an expression of such genuine admiration and love that it made everyone who saw them believe in second chances and redemption arcs, and the possibility that sometimes a single moment of grace could reshape an entire existence. The Bennett Reed Collection would expand to multiple properties across the next 5 years. It would win industry awards. It would become a name synonymous with luxury that still felt genuinely human. Guests would return not because of thread count or marble bathrooms, but because they felt valued, remembered, seen. But it all began on an ordinary evening at Mary's diner, when a millionaire asked a waitress for financial advice as a joke and discovered that the woman who answered him would change not just his life, but his entire understanding of what it meant to trust and be trusted in return. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to see more stories like this one. Comment if you've ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong. Like and share this with someone who needs to hear that their best chapter is still coming.